Okay, so continuing with our compositional strategies, we're going to look at ways to create tight cropping, neutral background, simplicity, and focal point. Both portraits you see here are utilizing neutral background and simplicity. We could say that the two people are tightly cropped. And because of this, we have clear, strong focal points. And of course, anytime you put somebody against a neutral backdrop or, a plain sheet of paper, that's helping to put the emphasis on whatever is in front of the backdrop. So strong portraits here. They have simplicity, neutral background. Definitely, we know the people are the focal point. So, tight cropping just means you are getting close. You're zooming in. We know that the face of the child here is the focal point and the emphasis of this photograph. We just have details of who this person is. It doesn't matter that we don't see where they are. Just the clothing and the face alone gives us an idea. And look at that amazing texture. Okay, so tight cropping again. It doesn't have to be a portrait. Your subject matter can be something else. Look around your own space. Do you have a corner of a room that you can crop in tight on? If you're in a car, can you look out the window and zoom in on something and crop in on, just some interesting shapes and lines that you see? What do you want to emphasize when you are zooming in and you're cropping tightly? In this case, shape is emphasized and line is emphasized in some of these. Okay, so one thing to think about when you're cropping in really tightly is how close can you get and still keep the subject matter in focus. Macro mode on a camera is going to help you get very close. It's going to depend on your camera type, how close you can get. A lot of the times you can get about 3 or 4 inches and still be able to keep your subject matter in sharp focus. Um, the next step above that would be to have a macro lens. They tend to be very expensive most of the time, but they're better than, they're a step above macro mode, and macro mode is basically simulating what having a real macro lens would do. Pictures that you might see like really close up of insects are usually shot with a macro lens, but we can still get really close even if we don't have those pieces of equipment using macro mode. You don't necessarily have to have any of that. You can still crop in really tightly, but the key is to try to keep things in focus generally. So neutral background just means that you want to have a plain, solid background with no distractions. You could use a colorful background. It's just that there isn't anything to distract from the subject matter. And in this case, the people are what we want to be the most important part of the picture. If you're going to shoot small objects, you can grab sheets of paper, blank sheets of paper, and that will also help you create neutral background if you set objects on top of something like that, whether it's a pillowcase or a dish towel or just a sheet of white paper, that would work too. So, breaks the rule of thirds, right? But this is such a great portrait. Definitely neutral background with the gray backdrop that we have. And it is really a very simple portrait. So, set your subject matter against a plain wall. Again, use sheets as a backdrop or paper or even a plain door if you have something like that at home. So again, when you're keeping your subject matter, you're trying to emphasize something, you want to cut out all distractions. So look at your viewfinder. Look at everything that is falling into the frame. Sometimes we forget to look at what is on the outside or what is around whatever it is that we're taking a picture of. And many times we bring back our pictures and we look at them and we say, oh, well, we should have cropped that out of the picture because it's really distracting. So try to remember to look at everything that's falling into the viewfinder or falling into the frame. Cut out anything that's in that might be distracting to whatever you want your focal point to be. Okay, again, here's a good use of subject matter in a very simplistic environment. And what we have here is really nice focus on the boy and the animal. It's very straightforward. It's a slightly high point of view. It's creating the focal point on the boy and the animal. And in a sense, the water is sort of creating a neutral background here as well. So one way to create simplicity is like in this Irving Penn image right here. You may want to gather up a lot of things that are a lot of the same type of things together, like the cigarette butts, and group them. So if you group things that are similar and you put them on a neutral background, then you're creating emphasis on whatever the objects are. So again, you can use cloth. You can put things on a floor that's pretty plain, even if you have like a carpet that's a solid color. Anything that's plain that cuts out. You can use shallow depth of field, like this portrait of the girl is utilizing here. So the blurred background is really helping to keep the focus on the girl who's sitting in the chair. So that really gives a feeling of simplicity to the entire portrait here. Okay, recognize anybody in here? Really good photographer that uses simplicity. It's Herb Ritts. He's photographed a lot of really well-known people that you'd probably recognize if you search for his work. This is a really good example in the backflip shot here that the sky is really creating the neutral background. So you could do this outside on a nice day or even a gray day where you're setting your subject against the sky. It could be a person. The photographer could lay on the ground and look up at somebody and just try to get a person against the sky. That's definitely going to create neutral background and simplicity. You could take an object and throw it in the air and practice getting a shot of that, whatever it is that you're throwing, suspended in the air. And if you're angling your camera right and you're just looking at the sky, then of course you've created neutral background and simplicity and a strong focal point. So the work of Karl Blasfeld is really good for thinking about all of these concepts like neutral background, emphasis, and focal point. And these photographs are an example of all of that. We're basically looking at plants that were magnified up to 30 times the actual size. So what we're looking at here is not the way our eyes would normally see the plants that Karl Blasfeld photographed. So in some ways, what he was doing was some scientific studies of these plants, but definitely if we look at it from an artistic point of view, he is using neutral background, creating a strong focal point, and he's got these beautiful shapes that are happening and some really interesting texture as well. So another good photographer to look at for these ideas in composition. All right, so last slide here, focal point. When I always ask my students to ask themselves, what is the most important part of this picture? What do you want to be the most important thing in the photograph? Isolate that in some way. If you need to use neutral background to create that isolated subject matter, then that's what you're going to do. You're going to eliminate your distractions. So you're always asking yourself, what is the most important part of this picture? Or if we were reading, we would ask ourselves, what is the main idea of this story? It's kind of the same concept. It's like we're doing the visual version of that. So all right, there you go. Have fun with that.